Still got background. Yep. There we go. Welcome to another episode of Sounds Reasonable. I'm your host, Dr. Brad, and I'm joined in the production of our weekly show by Tim and Sally. We're all members of the Free Thought community, and our Sounds Reasonable website can be found on Facebook. Do you experience frequent irrational thoughts, a pervasive belief in a divine skydance, an insatiable urge to read horoscopes, perform spells, speak in tongues, or pray? Fortunately, you are now listening to the cure for these ailments. Sounds reasonable. Excuse me. This show is dedicated to bringing you, the listener, the latest news in free thought, science, logic and reason, and politics and religion. And of course, we encourage you to share your thoughts with us after each episode by posting comments and asking questions on our Facebook page. What is free thought? What does it mean to be a free thinker? The dictionary definition is a person who forms opinions about religion based on reason, independent of tradition, authority, or established belief. Here's Christopher Hitchens' working definition. Our belief is not a belief. Our principles are not a faith. We do not rely solely upon science and reason because these are necessary rather than sufficient factors. But we distrust anything that contradicts science or outrages reason. We may differ on many things, but what we respect is free inquiry, open-mindedness, and the pursuit of ideas for their own sake. We will now move on to our science news segment, and remember that the scientific mind is one that allows its perceptions of reality to be constrained by good evidence and good argument. Exposure to the microbial environment is crucial to proper development of the digestive system, immune system, and surprisingly, even the wiring in the brain. Having a good microbial flora in the intestinal tract directly defends us from several microbial diseases as well. There are several probiotics that are on the market that people now take to enhance their microbial flora. However, how about newborns? How do they acquire their microbial flora in the first place? Tim has the story, so Tim, tell us all about it.
Thanks for the introduction, Dr. Brad. And as Dr. Brad mentioned, I'm going to focus on newborns, in particular, comparing the microbiota, intestinal flora of C-section delivered newborns to vaginally delivered newborns. And first of all, I just want to mention an earlier study, some findings of an earlier study that was published September 18th in 2019 in the journal Nature. And in that study, it was shown that newborns delivered by C-section tended to have more gut microbes associated with the hospitals than their vaginally delivered peers. Previous studies have linked C-sections with an increased risk of conditions such as asthma and diabetes, leading some researchers to suspect that babies born this way may have different mixes of gut bacteria than their because of their lack of exposure to the birth canal. But studies whether babies born by C-section do have microbiomes that are distinct from vaginally delivered infants. The vaginally delivered infants have yielded conflicting results. So in this study, they did an analysis where a new analysis, part of a long-term effort called the Baby Biome Study, was the largest thus far to look at that question. And researchers collected stool samples from 314 newborn babies, vaginally delivered, and then 282 born by C-section in the UK, and tested which bacteria were present, while the guts of the vaginally born babies had been colonized by commensal bacteria typically found in healthy people. Those delivered by C-section had microbiomes dominated by species commonly found in hospitals. such as those of the Enterococcus genus and Klebsiella genus. So that obviously is a concern. So now in the article I'm going to discuss here today, they may have come up with a solution to that situation with the C-section born babies. The article is from the journal Science. I'm sorry, from the Scientist, a news online news source. And it's the article dated October 1st of this year, and it's titled "Fecal Transfers from Moms to Babies After C-Section Trial Results." So again, the composition of the gut microbes in babies born via C-section tend to differ from those in babies born vaginally, as the early studies have shown. And again, there's been some speculation that maybe there's some long-term health consequences because of that. So to enrich beneficial bugs in the bellies of babies after C-section, the researchers performed a mom-to-infant microbial transplant in a clinical trial in which 7 cesarean-delivered babies were fed tiny amounts of their mother's fecal material mixed in with breast milk or milk, and that was their first feeding. It was found that the baby's gut became colonized with the sort of bacteria normally present in infants delivered vaginally, while the procedure produced no ill effects in the infants. There are no data on whether it has any benefit to the baby, and experts warn, of course, it may be dangerous to mothers to try to do that on their own. Okay, so not to,
I think it might.
yeah, yeah. So now the question is, and we'll mention this, we'll talk about this a little bit. This question, where are the babies getting their vaginally delivered babies? Where are they getting their microbiota in their gut intestine? And so, of course, as the baby leaves the womb, passes through the birth canal, is bathed in the mother's microbes, and experience obviously that the cesarean-born infants do not share. And so then the question is, are they getting that bacteria through the birth canal, or how else might they be getting it? Epidemiological evidence indicates that there may also be later life consequences to missing out on this bacterial baptism, if you will, as some call it. A recent study showed that cesarean-born kids have a higher likelihood of developing immune disorders such as inflammatory bowel disease, rheumatoid arthritis, and celiac disease. Now, the growing prevalence of cesarean deliveries make these potential repercussions an increasing concern. Numerous trials are therefore underway to test the safety and long-term benefits of swabbing cesarean-born infants with microbes from their mother's vaginas. But there aren't a lot of published data to suggest that the gut microbes of these swabs, the gut microbiomes of these swabbed infants match those of vaginally born babies. Says the microbiologist and immunologist William de Vos of the University of Helsinki and Wagenerian University, who led the research. Furthermore, he adds, quote, babies that you find in the baby, bacteria that you find in the baby are in their guts, obviously, are not found in the vagina. So it's not likely it's the source, he says. Quote, it's more likely that there is a fecal oral transfer at the time of birth, he says, because vaginally delivery is a, quote, messy business. And indeed, anecdotal accounts suggest most women deliver babies vaginally do defecate during labor. A mother's fecal microbes, unlikely those from the vagina, are geared to actually establish and colonize the baby's gut because they come from the gut, right? The team recruited 17 mothers who were due to undergo elective C-sections, collected stools and blood samples from them approximately 3 weeks prior to the delivery. Now, this gave the team time to prepare the samples and to screen them for infectious pathogens like HIV, hepatitis, C. diff, the Helicobacter pylori, norovirus, drug-resistant bacteria such as the group B streptococcus, and a long list of others. So on the basis of the screenings, only 7 of the mothers were selected to continue with the procedure. And then each newly delivered baby was given a dose of live fecal bacteria, a few million cells, and the first milk feed. And they did the first milk feed, obviously, via bottle. And their health was monitored for 2 days in the maternity ward, with follow-up visits at 4 weeks and 3 months. None of the babies experienced adverse health effects. Stool samples from the babies were collected after 2 days, then each week for 4 weeks, and then again at 12 weeks. Analysis of these samples, as well as control samples collected from 29 vaginally born babies and 18 untreated cesarean delivered babies, showed that while the gut microbes of the treated and vaginally born babies differed in the early days, after a week they were significantly more similar to each other, and both were distinct from the microbes of untreated cesarean babies. So using previously studied data on the microbiota of cesarean infants who received vaginal swabs, the treatment showed that these were also distinct from those of the vaginally born or feces fed infants. Excuse me. The main differences observed between untreated cesarean babies and those delivered vaginally or fed feces were that the control infants had a lower abundance of the commensal Bacteroides or Bifidobacteria species, but a higher abundance of those of the more pathogenic taxa in line with previous findings. While the study provided a proof of concept of the procedure, large and long-term studies would be necessary to confirm safety and determine whether there are any health benefits, because these, obviously are unknown. So it's obviously going to be necessary to do some more substantial study. And so and they think about it now too, that these fecal microbial transplantations are not really a new concept. In the last 6 years, it has become a standard of care therapy for the treatment of recurrent C. diff infections, Clostridium difficile. There has been a growing interest in the use of fecal microbiota for treatment of patients with chronic gastroenteritis infections and inflammatory bowel disease. Lately, there's also been interest in its therapeutic potential for cardiometabolic autoimmune disease and other extra-intestinal conditions that were not previously considered to be associated with intestinal microbiota. So, Dr. Brad and Sally, what are your thoughts about fecal transplantations?
Well, what about the commercially available stuff? In fact, I just saw a commercial. It couldn't have been 30 minutes ago.
Is that right?
where they're advertising the probiotics that you just buy off the shelf. Do you know if those would be recommended or potentially recommended for newborns, or are those adults only? Or I don't know. I've never taken one myself, so I don't know.
Right, I'm not sure either. Aren't many of those well, I guess I don't know the source of those. It's those are a yogurt.
Most of those are like yogurt, like acidophilus and stuff. I don't know. I find fecal transplants really interesting. I like what they're doing with MLS for them. They've seen a lot of good work coming in over there, especially internationally, not so much here in the US. I kind of wonder, I have a lot of friends who went through long inductions and then ended up with C-sections. And I wonder if that's just, and my sister is a nurse and tells me that's how we do it in the US. Most other places don't do it like that. You have that due date, and then the baby, if it's not due, they just induce it. And then a lot of times they end up having an emergency C-section because the baby's not ready to come out. I just wonder if we're doing anyone any justice with this method of trying to find alternatives to the C-section. I mean, of course, they are necessary, emergency C-sections, but we certainly seem to be bringing them around a bit more than it used to happen.
So maybe, yeah, the fact that they're maybe so quick to jump to C-section. Now, of course, I can see if they're worried about the life of the baby or mother, obviously.
Yes, of course.
But if it's just like, oh, it's going to be a 24-hour, long labor, and then they say, well, let's just,
more like you get induced and then 48 hours later, the baby still hasn't come out. And then they decide they have to do an emergency C-section because they've already popped the water. And yes, everybody's life is in risk at that point. Whereas maybe if they had just left the baby alone for a week or two, it would have decided. And of course, there are always circumstances where, the mom could be geriatric or have health conditions, or the baby has health. I mean, there are always medical reasons that we need C-sections, but they do seem to be a lot more common since we're inducing babies on a schedule now.
Okay, so the fact
in my non-professional, totally pedestrian, watching all my friends have babies opinion.
So just the fact that, okay, we calculated the due date is supposed to be here, and you passed your due date, so let's get it out of there.
Yes.
We're not just waiting for nature to take its course.
Yeah, I am one of 4 girls, and we all came on our own times. My sister Sarah, who should be joining me any minute now, was actually, my mother tells me, 2 months late. I do not think that is medically possible, but we came on our own times.
I think the record is longer than that, though, Sally. I think I've seen where someone was pregnant for well over a year.
That's insane.
So yeah, wasn't a record breaker, but yeah, certainly made it uncomfortable for mom.
Mama's going for the Guinness World Book of Records.
Yeah, I find like 2 weeks is might be about it, but 2 months, really, Mom? Like I was too young to really comprehend, at the time, but 2 months, really? I find that hard to believe.
Okay, kind of back to the microbial flora. So, inflammatory bowel disease, has definitely been on the rise. So it would be, something of interest to, see if there is a strong association between C-section and, IBD.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it'd be worth doing a little back history on that to look at that. So, is there a connection, or what is the connection? How many that have were a C-section delivery, and then kind of work your way back from there.
Right, and of course, some IBDs are autoimmune, and you'd mentioned that as a potential problem here as well. So yeah, that definitely needs to be looked at.
Right. Yeah, I thought it was fascinating. Very interesting.
All right. Well, I think that'll wrap us up here for Science News. So we'll be right back with more Sounds Reasonable after this short break.
Everything that brought me alive. Oh, we're all like monsters, playing with the monsters. They brought me alive, but got no alibi. It's a lover's fight without an alibi.
we're back with more Sounds Reasonable on October 18th, 2020. Conservation efforts to preserve our nation's wildlife are obviously needed. The world is literally losing hundreds of species per year due to the action of man altering the environment. So anything we can do to slow this down is a positive. An initiative to quote unquote put wolves on the ballot in Colorado is up for a vote this fall. Sally has the story. So what do the prospects look like for this to happen, Sally?
Well, that's a mixed bag, Bragg. So I shared on the Facebook page an article from the Uray County Plain Dealer from Thursday, October 15th by a guy by the name of Jason Blevins. And it's actually a repost from the Colorado Sun. And it talks about how Proposition 114 is asking voters to direct Colorado Parks and Wildlife to reintroduce wolves into Western Colorado with paws on the ground beginning in 2023. And the idea is that the wolves up in the Northern Rockies, which were introduced in the 90s and on up into most recently, would connect with the wolves down south in New Mexico and Mexican wolves. And so they would have a free range to run back and forth. Now, there already has been a small pack of wolves that did come down into northwestern Colorado from those Yellowstone, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho packs. But 3 of those wolves were already shot, and Wildlife and Fisheries knows about that. The state of Colorado has a wildlife commission, which is elected and appointed officials. And they decided way back in 2016 that the reintroduction of wolves was just a no-go in the state. Most of the people, of course, against the reintroduction of wolves are ranchers and game hunter lobbyists. Now, Colorado has a funny elk population issue. They say that there are still too many elk in the north, but not enough in the south. So Colorado has actually increased the number of hunting licenses they are allowing, even though they're saying that packs in the south are only at 42% of what they want to see. And the south and the west, of course, you know, we're in this huge drought right now, so there's a lot of stress being felt on wildlife. Ranchers have always held a very strong lobby out here in this western slope where they would be introduced. The politics about it are that it's a rural versus urban problem, that people in the city want to see wolves reintroduced and they like the idea of nature, but they don't want to live with it. And the reality is that the wolves would not be introduced over on the eastern slope on the Denver, Fort Collins, Pueblo side of the state. They would be introduced out here on the western side. But a large portion of the land out here on the western side is federally managed land, BLM land. And right now it's seeing heavy effects just from what I've seen out here for the last month, 2 months, 3 months, hiking around, is a lot of overgrazing. We've only had maybe 3 instances of precipitation since I got up here in mid-July. And so we've completely missed our monsoon season. And everything is dry and brittle. And when I go out on the federal lands, they are still running cattle out there. There is no water. It's been very windy as well as dry. So there's no grass holding anything down. It's turning into a dust bowl situation, which is an aside from the wolf problem, but it just seems like everything's kind of coming together this year for one big 2020 celebration. But, you know, so I posted the article. They have some information, a lot of great links out to who is supporting it, who is not supporting it, who is funded, which side. It's a political debate. 36 of the rural counties, mostly out here on the western slope, have sent in oppositions to the ballot. But the ballot specifically tells Colorado Wildlife and Fisheries that they do need to introduce them by 2023. Now, Wildlife and Fisheries says that as long as the wolf is a protected species, that it's not up to them, it's up to the feds. But President Trump has already made clear that he intends to remove wolves from a protected species listing. And so they'll no longer have that, that safety net. A lot of the other states, they've already been delisted and now they're hunted. I think it's Montana, but it could be Wyoming, where they are free, ranchers are free to shoot wolves if they see them. Now, they've also seen a lot of ranchers specifically move their herds into wolf territory to cause issues. Of course, on the ballot proposition, Colorado would have to pay back ranchers who lost any livestock from the predatory animals. Last year, I think Wyoming paid $58,000 back. So that's not a whole lot to see a recovery of an apex species. Of course, I question the biologists at Colorado Wildlife and Fisheries who say that this is a horrible idea. I have to wonder who they think pays their salary if they don't want to see a reintroduction of a biodiverse. It's just, it's political, but, and the ranchers say that it's called ballot box biology, that voters are deciding, management of scientific and environmental things just by going to the ballot. But, given how frustrated people are with climate change and the way things are going, maybe the ballot box is the only way to go. I know I don't have a lot of trust anymore with my public, officials and whether or not they are putting forth correct data through their departments even to support a biodiverse planet or where we need to be. Any thoughts?
So the major objection is, I guess, an old one, apparently. We're going to have the equivalent of cattle or sheep rustling by wolves going on. Again, it seems to me that if they're going to be introduced into the federal land, sure, you're always going to have some roam out. Well, all you have to do is allow the shooting of wolves that happen to roam out of that territory and allow them to roam free in the federal land. I don't see a problem with that. Because let's face it, wolves are smart. They won't go where they know they're being killed off. They'll stay in an area at least as long as there's adequate food, which it sounds like there is. Now, the elk population, you said, is out of control in that area. Was that correct?
Well, out of control is, they said the peak in 2001 was at 305,000 animals, and now they're at 258,000 head, which is not really out of control in terms of what they used to be before we almost wiped out the elk population, long before. I mean, everybody's feeling the stresses of habitat encroachment and, humans everywhere. We now have four-wheelers and dune buggies running through our national forest. All of our national forests have been open to motorized vehicles, at least some part. So we'll have motorcycles on our hiking trails. It's difficult to really feel and get that sense of quiet and calm, but it's about learning to live with apex predators. We can't always just use eradication as a means of solving our problems, especially not when we're talking about ecology and biodiversity. And having the wolves come back has shown clear, healthy benefits for other states. And we need to learn to live with these predators. We need to learn to live with bears. We need to learn to live with cats. We need to change our approach and not be so fearful, but learn how to live with them in a way that we can all coexist. Europe has a lot more people and wolf density, and especially countries like Poland, and they manage there's in the Great Lakes region, there's over 4,000 wolves, and you don't see that much issue with them out there. Now out here in the West, they have about 2,000 in the Upper Rockies, and ranchers are crying, "Oh my gosh, we can't keep a cow alive." Well, cows are another problem in itself. We have a meat addiction problem as it is, but we need to learn to coexist with the other creatures of our planet.
And you mentioned that the wildlife and fisheries, they're against it,
Yes,
and because
it will allow predation of hunted and agricultural species.
well, but that isn't part of why you're introducing them, to keep those populations in check.
Well, I think
Part of
they
that.
feel there's more money in selling hunting licenses to men with high-powered rifles than allowing wolves to attempt to survive, against the odds that we put against them.
Yeah, always comes down to dollars, doesn't it?
It seems like it.
So, just to jump to a different species, but that's one I'm familiar with, cichlid fish, with the Rift Valley lakes in Africa. They've been trying to cut down on the amount of the cichlids that are sent from there all over the world for aquariums, because they're a very popular aquarium fish. And apparently, it's eventually, unfortunately, going to take care of itself, because there are a number of the species that the locals now say they haven't seen for years. They just overfished them so bad that now they can't even find them. We're not going to be able to survive as a sole species on this planet, and someday I hope a wider variety or a wider section of our population comes to that realization. So let's hope for the best here, and maybe we can save the wolves in Colorado, Sally. So keep up the efforts out there. Nice work. Thanks.
All
thanks
fingers
so much
crossed.
Thanks so much for that story.
Yep.
All right, we'll be back after another short break.
Messing with my head again. You had your heart set on me, but these feels, they come and go, and they come so easily. Tell me what it is about you that I can't forget, but you're breaking down my walls again just to set me free. Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you are, we always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling? Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you are, we always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling?
And we're back with more Sounds Reasonable. The No Religious Test Clause of the United States Constitution is a clause within Article 6, Clause 3. Quote, the senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. But no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. And I agree. No religious test should be used to qualify a person for public office. The problem is that there is a religious test, albeit not written in the Constitution. Try running for public office, openly declaring you are an atheist, and see how far you get in any state, but perhaps Oregon or California. How far do you think a politician would get in Nebraska, Tim? Oh, you're muted, Tim.
I said, not even out the door.
Sally, how about Louisiana? Think an atheist would have a chance in Louisiana?
Oh, not a shot in heck.
Well, the article I am going to relay today comes from, of all places, the Salt Lake Tribune. It is authored by George Pyle on October 8th, 2020, and is titled, American Laws Must Pass the Atheist Test. A lucky circuit breaker built into the American system of government is the fact that even if the courts fail to stand up for the rights of individuals, you may be all right anyway, depending on where you live. Our courts set a floor for human rights, not a ceiling. That's an important point to remember, actually. Now, if the U.S. Supreme Court tomorrow ended its insistence that states permit same-sex marriage, protect abortion rights, integrate their schools, or, as has already been demonstrated, heed the Voting Rights Act, that would be dreadful, but life would change only in states where legislatures or judges wanted it to. States that wanted to maintain proper levels of equal rights could do so. And again, that's another point. But of course, the problem is that that in essence would create yet further division within our already divided country. Now, there may be some serious deciding required pretty soon. Well before the U.S. Supreme Court declared that it was unconstitutional to deny same-sex couples the right to marry, the trend among states was heading toward marriage equality. Legislation passed and court rulings made at the state level not only preceded the 2015 Obergefell versus Hodges decision, they also laid the moral and legal groundwork for it. Now, those of us who saw the simple justice of that ruling might have hoped the matter was settled nationwide. Silly liberals. An alarm that the marriage equality battle might not be over was sounded Monday when the Supreme Court rejected an appeal from Kim Davis. Now, do you remember Kim Davis? She made big headlines by refusing to issue marriage licenses in Kentucky, I believe it was. And of course, good old Mike Huckabee jumped in to help her out. You remember that?
Yeah.
So Kim Davis got into a peck of trouble for refusing to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples, even after the court had said she had to. Now, the bad news was that two of the justices, Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, spelled out how they agreed to toss the case only because Davis asked the wrong way. They said that instead of pleading qualified immunity, that tool used by some police officers who really shouldn't have shot that person, Davis should have sought exemption from the law on religious freedom grounds. Now, that's 2 votes to overturn marriage equality as a constitutional right. To backtrack on what Thomas called the court's cavalier treatment of religion, and High Court nominee Amy Coney Barrett, to the other Obergefell dissenters, And you have a pretty solid 6-3 majority in favor of a return to law based on unreasonable fear of gay people. Of course, Thomas and Alito are wrong about religious freedom. A judicial ruling or a statute passed through the democratic process in favor of sex marriage rights in no way violates the religious freedom of a single human being. To claim otherwise is not to seek religious freedom, but to back theocracy, the rule of civil society by religious dogma. If a law or ruling only makes sense to the religious or to followers of a certain faith, it is something a constitutional democracy cannot tolerate. It has to be a policy that could be supported by members of any religion or of none. In short, it has to pass the atheist test. It's not hard. As energized as the American civil rights movement was by one strain of religious tradition and opposed by another, even Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech was 95% secular. A sermon that explicitly took as its text not the Bible, but the Declaration of Independence. That's something that a lot of people forget, by the way, what that speech was primarily about. Most opposition to abortion rights also fails to muster any reasoning that isn't based on religious teachings, which makes it an argument without merit in a free society. It is telling that the argument raised by, among others, Senator Mike Lee of Utah, is that the Equal Rights Amendment is a bad idea because if women have equal rights before the law, it will be impossible to prohibit abortion. It is fair to ask if opposition to abortion leads to opposition to legal equality for women or follows from it. If a far-right Supreme Court takes back the constitutional guarantees of marriage equality and abortion rights, that will change things only in states that choose to end those rights. We can guess what might happen in Utah unless our market-oriented Republican leaders realize how unpopular it will be for the rest of the modern world to do business in such a backward state. So that's what we're facing with our newest nominee to the court. And I look forward to some interesting discussion from you guys. So go ahead.
I don't know where to begin with her. It's like, okay, we don't want to give women equal rights because then they want equal pay too, and that's,
Wouldn't that be terrible, Sally, if you actually got paid the same amount as a man doing the same job?
No.
I moved back to Louisiana where we get 65 cents on the dollar and it rubs me the wrong way all the time. But
yeah.
No.
And
I don't see a lot of good coming out of reproductive health from this lady from outside New Orleans, Metairie. I know a ton of people who went to school with her and her family, her sisters. It's a very small city down there. Everybody's tickled pink that she is going to be on the Supreme Court for like the next 4 decades. But I don't see a lot of it being very progressive for women's rights, reproductive rights, actual scientific facts about reproductive rights.
Yeah, now back in the mid 80s, the Equal Rights Amendment was up for a vote, and it reached 34 out of the 37 states needed to pass. And it's frankly just sat there. It's not that it's done, it's just sat there. No one has tried to reinitiate the vote. But
They actually tried recently in Louisiana, but it was a no-go. It was a complete
no-go. Well, I'm not
No go.
Not surprised, but you know, if I keep wondering, you know, if it was revisited, if we'd have some states that voted for it prior jump ship now. I don't know what the
Maybe.
zeitgeist is on the Equal Rights Amendment nationwide. But you know, I guess the good news is that I see, at least in our young people, that they have this innate sense of what is truly fair. You know,
So-
they are for these things. You know, they are for gay rights. They are for women's rights. You know, so Sally wants to jump in. Go ahead, Sally.
Brad, I was on the same campus as you for a number of years, and I can say that not all of the youngsters feel that way.
Oh, I didn't say all. I didn't say all. But
It's a very
national
conservative college campus.
I- Well,
Well, we got Frank Kovacs leading a wonderful group on our campus. So, yes.
I can, I think if you look at younger, so look at the high school groups, you know, that I deal with all the time, and that I would agree with you, Brad. I think they're a lot more accepting of differences, you know, and at least in this small school I teach at, and you know, I see a lot more tolerance there. Not, of course, not everybody, but it's not like it was, and you know,
Cross your fingers.
well, I guess just again, based on my limited exposure to young kids, which is
Mhm.
at my school,
That's not right.
and I do at Iowa Western, you know, I'm exposed to them too, but I guess I just see a lot more tolerance than if I look back from years ago. It appears to be more tolerated. And again, back to the ERA, that's what I always thought. I said, why? How is that not, you know, passed? How is that still not brought up and not, you know, part of the forefront? And maybe you're right. Maybe it is that they're worried that some that voted for it will, but I just would think that would be a hot issue.
Why do you think it's a money issue, Sally? Just because of salaries being higher?
Because when they fought for a couple of years ago, how long ago was this? About 6-7 years ago, it was on the ballot in Texas, and Kroger's, the grocery chain, fought against it because they didn't want to have to pay their women checkout ladies the same as they paid their males. And it failed in Texas because of money. It's always because of money, because the businesses would then have to pay women the same amount that they pay men. And yeah, some of it is subjective, some of it's objective, but in the end, they don't want to pay a woman as much as, and the evidence is there that women are getting stiffed, but they don't want to pay it.
Well, I wonder what the case is with the high tech companies, you know, like say Amazon or you know, Microsoft, you know what have you. You know, I would pick them as being much more progressive. I would expect equal pay there. Do you have any idea, Sally?
I feel like when the Me Too movement came out, it was shown that it's not such an issue there because they're mostly like men. It was like 73% male to like 20%. I mean, they had a long way to go, not just introducing minorities, but also females and getting away from the white male stereotype.
But it's some of that because of who goes into those fields. Is it some of
That's
that?
what I was going to ask too.
Well, yeah. I
But-
mean, there's, you know, societal in the South, women, I still know women who don't know science, any science at all, like don't know science, like
But there's no
basic.
excuse, right? But I think, Brad, I would speculate again with you that even though the majority or the numbers of women in those fields, I would think because those companies were established by younger individuals, that, and maybe I'm wrong, but I would think that they're more progressive, like you say, and you're going to see that equal pay there. But we don't know. I mean, I guess that's my opinion.
You know, the computer programming gaming community, I might get some feedback on this. That's not very friendly, but they're spun off incels and this whole society of men that is very anti-female.
But see, here's the thing that
Have
they
y'all
could be-
talked about incels on the show?
Oh, yeah,
haven't seen
I know,
all the
I know
shows.
the term incel, yeah, involuntarily celibate.
Yes.
I've talked about them.
And they're scary. They are
So, well,
scary.
Well, they are, but that brings us to a whole nother issue of our society that I think should be changed. But anyway,
We got a lot of changing to do.
exactly, we got a lot of work to do as
A
liberals.
lot of work.
I guess I
Come
would
on, liberals.
be, if that came up, issues like that came up to vote, that you would, and maybe I'm wrong thinking that women would come out in droves in favor of that. And then and not all males are gonna be against that. So I think that you would have a majority of people voting in favor of those equal rights. And again, you tack it on to not just women, just across the board. Tack that on across the board.
I'm gonna, Sally, if you want one more last word, I'll give it to you, but I find it absolutely ridiculous that we have to have this conversation. How is it that we don't start out as everyone having equal rights? That's what
From the
pisses
white
off
males.
most,
That's true. It's
Have
true.
y'all watched Mrs. America? It's on Hulu. It was on FX. It was a mini series.
Nope, didn't see that.
Go watch it. It's fascinating. It's all about the ERA and the two different factions, and it's fictionalized drama, but it's great. Mrs. America. 2 thumbs
All
up.
right. Well, there you have it.
Give y'all something to watch this week.
Your movie recommendation. Yeah.
That's right. So we'll pick up on that. Okay, so we'll have to leave it there, and we'll be back with our crazy story of the week.
I'm feeling so hollow. Don't you know? And don't you know? I'm living in shadow. Don't you know? And don't you know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? And you were fool's gold.
And we're back with our crazy story of the week. The death penalty. Not something that comes to mind when looking for comedy. However, never underestimate the Republican mentality to provide some joviality over such a grim topic. Our crazy story of the week comes from the Progressive Secular Humanist. It was authored by Michael Stone and published on February 15th of last year. And the article is titled, Wyoming Senator Lynn Hutchings Defends Death Penalty because Jesus was executed. Deplorable ignorance. Wyoming Senator Lynn Hutchings defends the death penalty because Jesus was executed. And without the death penalty, quote, Jesus Christ would not have been able to die to absolve the sins of mankind. Earlier this week, a bill abolishing the death penalty in Wyoming was defeated by the state Senate. The progressive bill passed in the state House as well as a Senate Legislative Committee, but it was defeated on the Senate floor. One of the bill's opponents, GLP Senator Lynn Hutchings, quote, argued that without the death penalty, Jesus Christ would not have been able to die to absolve the sins of mankind, and therefore capital punishment should be maintained. Boy, that is solid logic. Hard to argue with that one. Hutchings said, the greatest man who ever lived died via the death penalty for you and me. I'm grateful to him for our future hope because of this. Governments were instituted to execute justice. If it wasn't for Jesus dying by the death penalty, we would all have no hope. That's right. Republican Senator Lynn Hutchings believes the death penalty is a good thing because Jesus was executed. And if it's good enough for Jesus, well, you know the rest. Hutchings is an idiot. Let's just spell it out. But she is also a dangerous, hateful idiot. Earlier this week, Hutchings compared homosexuality to bestiality and pedophilia while speaking to members of, get this, Cheyenne Central High School Gay Straight Alliance. According to reports, Hutchings made the following statement to the high school students. If my sexual orientation was to have sex with all of the men in there, and I had sex with all of the women in there, and then they brought their children and I had sex with all of them, and then brought their dogs in, and I had sex with them, should I be protected for my sexual orientation? Her remarks are despicable. It's always ignorant and wrong to compare homosexuality to bestiality and pedophilia, but to do so in front of some gay and bisexual high school students is cruel beyond imagination. Indeed, many are calling on Hutchings to resign after her hateful and dishonest remarks to the group of high school students. For example, Wyoming Democratic Party Chairman Joe Barbuto issued the following statement. Senator Hutchings' comments are indefensible, insensitive, and repugnant. Her remarks were not appropriate for any audience, but that she said this to children is especially revolting. It shows a clear lack of good judgment. Senate District 5 deserves a senator who they can trust to behave and speak in a manner that upholds the dignity of the office and reflects an understanding that every person deserves to be treated with respect. Lynn Hutchings is now incapable of providing that level of representation. She must resign immediately. Hutchings is a first-term senator and a former House member who is not afraid to use her religious superstition to terrorize and demean high school students or justify the execution of criminals. Surprise! She also claims to be pro-life. Bottom line, Wyoming Senator Lynn Hutchings defends the death penalty because if it wasn't for Jesus dying by the death penalty, we all would have no hope. Those who know me know what is coming. Say it with me, Tim and Sally.
Okay.
Religious beliefs have consequences. Discussion.
I don't understand why the separation of church and state is so hard. I don't even know why we're even arguing for the death penalty because of Jesus. I mean, that just doesn't even have a, I mean, Tim.
Maybe before they get to run for office, they need to have a mental health evaluation. Maybe a religious mental health evaluation, because we got.
We'll eliminate the religious test and
yeah,
and have a mental health test.
So, yeah, it's just incredible. We had like in Iowa, like Steve King, blatant racist white supremacist that was in office for years and years. And again, that tells you, I guess, a lot about the people that are in the district he lives, and maybe the same thing true with her about the people
in Louisiana. We had Bobby Jindal, who was governor, who had a degree in biology yet didn't believe in evolution and wanted to make the Bible the state book. Which
Yeah, I remember
is
that.
all on board with. Thank God for the ACLU. And I mean it. Thank God for the ACLU.
Well,
And you think, people think Islam, extreme Islam, those groups are the threat, and we know that it's not. It's the fundamentalist Christians,
Yes.
maybe even non-fundamentalist Christians, just in general, Christianity is
Oh
the
my
threat.
God.
yeah, I've argued that for a long time that, who's, it's kind of like the old Star Wars quote, who's the greater fool, the fool or the people who follow him?
Right.
And, so so you have someone like this that obviously was voted in.
Mhm.
So who's really the greater fool here? So I don't know. It's we're just a society awash in this nonsense, and somehow I'm hoping we can figure a way out of it. And I don't know. It's just crazy world, and that was our crazy story. So,
Barry Goldwater.
Okay.
If you're going to go back in history and go after one person, everybody says Hitler, Barry Goldwater. He's the
well,
one who started the whole evangelical movement into politics and all of this nonsense that we deal with now. It all goes back to him in Arizona and him and Ronald Reagan, playing around on golf courses. Barry
Well,
Goldwater.
I blame Sirhan for assassinating Bobby Kennedy. That changed the course of history,
Yeah.
ripple effect of the course of history in the United
it
States.
did.
He would have been president.
So civil rights would have moved forward much faster and much broader if Bobby Kennedy had managed to win the presidency, which he was almost certainly going to.
Right, and that just says it's just caused a ripple in time, and just as leading to, I'd say it's the problems that we have today is because of Sirhan.
Well, there we go.
Yeah, we need that time machine, I guess.
It's supposedly possible now.
Right, I've seen that.
Scary thought. Scary thought, because the crazies are going to have the time machine too.
That's true. So we have to beat them to it, I guess.
Yeah, it's a race.
We'll build it, use it, and then destroy it.
There you go. That seems to be the only way to do it. Otherwise, everything unravel. Oh wait, everything is unraveling.
Yes.
Someone came up with the time machine. All right.
Well, okay, I think that wraps us up for this week. So if you've enjoyed our program, please pass the word to your friends and associates, believers and non-believers alike. Again, just a reminder that you are welcome to post questions and comments on our Facebook page. Remember, there is a big difference between having good reasons for what one accepts to be true and having bad ones. Incidentally, this is the only distinction one needs to become a strict atheist. This has been Dr. Brad for Sally and Tim saying so long.
See ya.
Bye.